Hello, students, third year students of Business English 3. So here is our video commentary for the week. This week we were talking about kind of the end of the stock market and investment, and so I had directed us towards the end of handouts that we'd previously received addressing ethical investments. I'll touch briefly on those, and then we'll move on to business ethics, and then in particular the assignment that was issued this week. So this page, which I had given out already, you should have in paper form, had two elements that I think were interesting for discussion. The first one is 2E discussion, and it says, imagine that you have just come from a secret meeting of a company's board of directors which has made a decision that you know will financially ruin a close friend of yours unless she can sell some shares before the board's decision becomes known. You are having dinner at her home that same evening. Should you expect to warn her? Should you do so? I think this is a particularly interesting situation because it brings up that moral crisis of being a good friend, being a responsible employee, and being a responsible citizen. So when we discussed this in class in previous years, a lot of people had mentioned that they would tell their friend. Now, this is an interesting situation because if you did so, you'd actually be breaking the law, and you could be getting not only yourself, but your friend put into jail. There are some celebrities in recent years, Martha Stewart being the most famous, who have done this, and those are the kind of consequences. Even if you aren't caught and it goes unseen as far as why this decision was made, it could still be, if you're not prosecuted legally, have repercussions on your career and your placement within that organization. There's another question that follows, well, a series of scenarios anyway. It says, case study ethical investments. Imagine that a relative who knows very little bit about finance asks you to invest $10,000 for her in a portfolio of investments, but insists that she only wants her money invested in wholly ethical companies. Well, now that you've become experts in investing, you've played the stock market and you've done currency investment, then perhaps you could advise a friend in this capacity. But there's a variety of categories, and I think it's interesting to think about as an investor, as well as a consumer, which of these activities you think of as being unethical, or the level of its violation of morality, your personal morality, being so large that it would prevent you from investing in these companies. For me, a lot of the things on this list don't automatically do that. There's the question, which of the following activities would cause you to rule out a company as a possible investment? And I think there's some borderline categories for me, and a lot of them are simply no. Like producing nuclear energy, for me, no. Selling alcohol, no. Selling tobacco, no. I mean, nuclear energy is a valid source as long as it's well controlled and is greener than our fossil fuel energy production right now. Selling alcohol and tobacco, I think that's a personal matter, and it would never prevent me from investing in a company. There are some things, however, that do violate clearly my personal ethics, and I'd like to encourage you all to think about which ones might do that for you and which ones don't, and hopefully you've already done that. For me, things like factory farming, which is for me, a severely problematic practice, not only for the animals, but for our future when we think about the safety of food and how it might affect us in the future. That's heavily problematic for me, and I would avoid investing in a company, and I consider that unethical on multiple grounds. Manufacturing weapons, I also would not invest in a company that manufactured weapons, simply because I believe they perform a mostly negative function in this world, and I'd rather put my money somewhere else. And companies not recognizing trade unions, that's also a big problem for me. As corporations become more powerful, their employees often lost privileges and rights, and one of the major reasons that's happened is because of not only the legal situations that have allowed corporations to disband trade unions, but corporations not recognizing them in the first place. And for me, that's not a fair condition for their workers. So if I knew about that, I would avoid investing in those companies. I would also avoid investing in companies that test cosmetic products on animals. And as far as the other categories, it's kind of yes or no depending on the situation. Like one of these categories says paying low wages in developing countries, and I think it depends on the way that companies are doing that. There's something that exists called fair trade. It comes up in certain products. Like I've bought fair trade coffee before, and that tries to offer a competitive market price to coffee producers, even if they're in low income countries. So I think that's a positive practice. It often has beneficial social and environmental consequences, and it's something that I would endorse. I wouldn't necessarily hold it against companies to pay low wage levels in developing countries. What we consider low wage levels may be high wage levels there, and so I don't necessarily think it's a problem for companies to move labor to a country where it's cheaper as long as they offer relatively fair conditions, even if they might seem low to us. So, think about which ones you would consider personal violations or unethical as potential investors. When we have chosen companies in the past in Business English 1, we chose corporations, and I asked you, why would you choose that company as a company you would work for? Ethics are hopefully part of that decision, what a company believes in. And I like to hope that companies that are more socially responsible, environmentally responsible, I guess responsible in most ways, would be more attractive to investors, to you as investors, and to you as consumers and the general public. Then we get into a discussion leaving those ethical investments behind and just talk about business ethics in general. And there are different perspectives on this. You have on the one side Milton Friedman, who comes up in the article, and you have other experts who are on the very opposite side of him. And this discussion starts with this page where we were given a kind of a cartoon sheet, and it says, which of the views expressed in the illustration do you agree with? And I think the one that was closest to mine would be, I think I agree with several of these small quotes, would be number 7, which is a company has responsibilities to its suppliers, its customers, its employees, the local community, and society in general, as well as to its shareholders. I think this is a company taking everything into account. I don't necessarily think it's only the company's responsibility to oversee those elements. I think a government has to step in, and we're going to talk about that in the coming weeks. What is a business's responsibility? What is the public's responsibility? And where do governments and associated companies and partners step in? So I think that's kind of the opposite perspective of the number 1 here that's expressed. Business is business, and we have this kind of large man with a whole bunch of smokestacks behind them. And I think there have been times when that has been the case. If we think about early times in the Industrial Revolution and the deplorable conditions found in cities and the horrific environmental consequences of those kind of behaviors, then I think it's obvious that that way of doing business is largely destructive, even if not immediately to the company doing it, eventually even to the company doing it, in the long run. So I think that's a way, and I think that's why governments have stepped in, and we have, some conditions, we mentioned labor unions earlier, that are present in most developed countries and even in lesser developed countries where people are protected. As workers, people are protected. We have limited working hours, we have minimum wage, and if business was just business, those things would not even exist. So in the reading that followed this cartoon, let's say, we had, there we go, let me just find it, profits and social responsibility. So I wanted to go over some of the answers in this. This material comes from one book, and then some later material comes from another book, and sometimes these answers are a little bit indirect, so I'll provide you my answers for them. The first one was comprehension, and it says, write questions relating to the text to which these could be the answers. Number 1 says, according to Mitchell, in order to generate favorable public opinion. And this is, why did companies start providing, charitable ways of operating? There are different ways of saying that. There's no quite exact way of saying that correctly, but that's one possible answer. Number 2 said, so that workers will probably be more loyal to the company and will have more money to spend on products made by the firm and others. And this is why did, and so we think about what question would match this. Why did rational capitalists incorporate considerations of their employees? Number 3 says, because he believes such behavior to be unbusinesslike and therefore dangerous for the company and for capitalism in general. And this is why is Milton Friedman against welfare capitalism. I mentioned him at the beginning when we turn towards ethics, and here he comes back again in several of these comprehension tasks in a row. Number 4 says, according to Friedman, generally to receive as big a dividend as possible, and that is what is the essential obligation of a company. Like I said, that's kind of like business is business. And that is the original obligation of every company, and we know that. But it has to operate in compliance with other situations. And according to Friedman, in number 5, it says only the country's law and ethical customs. And that is, and so the question that would be the answer to that is, what should a business conform to? And that's the bare minimum. And Friedman believes that if you're doing that, then you're doing your job. And I think it's true that the government has to hold businesses accountable, but it's also up to the government to decide what laws and what restrictions and what level of controls they are placing on businesses. And then the more of those that exist, then the more likely that company is to be socially responsible. That, of course, depends very much on the government and the company involved. So number 6 says less pollution or lower employment, for example, and the answer question to this would be, what might shareholders prefer instead of money? You know, here, if we're thinking about investment from an ethical perspective, then like some of the situations that we had on this earlier sheet regarding stock investments, as an investor, sometimes, I mean, clearly you're investing money, you want to get money, but it's not always the only thing. It doesn't always have to be the only or the top priority. So shareholders might prefer, these kinds of benefits in their company to a little bit of extra money. And last, number 7, anyone has a claim or an interest in a firm, such as a supplier, customers, and employees. And the answer question to this would be, who are stakeholders in a stakeholder model? And that's that model that considers everyone as a relevant participant in a company's life, both in society and in the company itself. So I'll quickly go through the vocabulary because it's fairly straightforward, and hopefully we found these in the text. Number 1 says institutions or organizations that provide help for people in need, and that is a charity or charities. Number 2, acceptability according to law or public opinion, that is legitimacy. Number 3, the situation when there are a large number of sellers and buyers, freedom to enter and leave markets, a complete flow of information, and so on. This is called free enterprise, and it's very resemblant to the free market system that we discussed in currency earlier this semester, when currencies are allowed to float according to supply and demand in a purely free way. Number 4, a condition of general well-being and government spending designed to achieve this. This is welfare. In America, for example, where there are less social programs, these welfare programs are often considered, negatively by many people. I disagree. Number 5, menacing or endangering, that's threatening or to threaten. Number 6, liveliness, health, energy, strength. The answer would be vitality. Number 7, an economic system in which anyone can attempt to raise capital, form a business, and offer goods or services. This is capitalism, the foundation of most of our modern economies. Number 8, complying with or following, such as rules, that would be to conform. Number 9, expressed, given in a material form, that's embody is a verb, or embodied is an adjective. And number 10, supporters, people who argue in favor of something, those would be proponents as opposed to opponents, so proponents. So there's another section that follows regarding ethics in the law, and here again, I think it's up to you to decide where you sit in these situations. It says, Milton Friedman, while dismissing the notion of social responsibility, still argues that a business must conform to the basic rules of society. in your own opinion, do the following activities, several of which are illegal, conform to the basic rules of society or not? So I think the big question is, one, I mean, it's up to us, you know, on our own to decide whether these violate our personal morality, and our personal code of ethics. But some of these we might consider as conforming to the basic rules of society, even if they are illegal, or vice versa. Some that are legal, we might say violate our basic laws of society, and societies are different and countries are different, and so there are situations in which some of these items are legal and some of them are illegal. Like number one, it says bribing corrupt foreign officials in order to win foreign orders on the grounds that where bribery is a way of life, you have no alternative if you want to win a contract. This is technically illegal in our country, in Serbia. It's also illegal in America. Does it happen? Yeah. We all know that it happens here a lot, and it happens at high levels in America. So it's illegal, but I think there are lots of times where people are connected enough, well connected, that it, despite their violations, they continue to do so. Number two says industrial espionage, spying on competitors' R&D departments with concealed cameras and microphones, bribing employees rather than doing your own research and development. This is also considered illegal and a violation of patents. It's trespassing. It could be a violation of intellectual property as well. But there are companies around the world who do this, and there are countries in the world who have companies who are famous for this, such as many companies in China who produce technological goods. So the next three on the list are legal. We've talked about that one before. Number four, lobbying. This depends on which country you're in, but in America, this is very, very legal and very, very powerful. I personally think that's a huge problem, and there's a reason why lobbying is illegal in many other countries that call themselves democracies. In number five, it says telling only half the truth in advertisements, or exaggerating a great deal, or keeping quiet about the bad aspects of a product. This is mostly what advertising is. It's purely legal, and depending on the level to which you do that, it's pretty much, shedding light on the better qualities of yourself. We do this when we interview, and companies do this when they advertise. Number six is illegal. Or legal depending on where you're doing it. There's a lot of creative accounting that allows companies in America, for example, to have offshore locations where they funnel money to avoid paying taxes, and it's perfectly legal. We call this offshoring. That's one way of having bases in small islands on the other side of the world. So we call these tax havens, and there are lots of companies that do this, and it's perfectly legal, even though it seems like a fundamental violation of their responsibility. And whistleblowing, this can be illegal if there are confidentiality agreements, and it's an interesting situation because often someone who's out trying to do something that's morally good is breaking the law by violating some terms of their employment contract. But this can be an issue even with governments, and we've had that show up in recent years, including the U.S. government and people doing whistleblowing inside the government, in which case some of these scenarios could be applied intragovernmental or extragovernmental. So finally, after thinking about the way that business and ethics interact in a variety of ways, we, for our specific assignment, are forced to look at it in one way, really, and that is in an attempt to defend the company. We talked last week about branding and how more and more commonly, whether it's an advertising campaign or simply an image that's projected in another way by a company, the image of a company, like the branded image of a company, is a large source of value for a company, and so how it is perceived in the public light is very important to that company's success. So when companies get in trouble, then it's often up to communication experts and PR agencies to cover the company's tracks as best as possible, or at least to present them in as positive a way as possible. So our assignment, and related to ethics in the law, was called Spinning the Truth, and that came from this particular sheet. And it says PR Vision is a communication agency that specializes in protecting reputations and corporate image in a time of media crisis. Their company motto is, when dealing with the media, whoever tells the best story wins. So in a way, as English students, this is one of the areas in which we might use our linguistic skills to try to be more eloquent than the other side. In the next few weeks, we'll also be encountering a debate type situation where we will also have a chance to potentially show off our skills in argumentation. So this time, regardless of how we feel about the scenario, and I think it's important to also consider your own perspective, we have 5 scenarios here. We have very few details about these, so you have to use your imagination a lot. We have Jackson's & Sons, Lambert Associates, Pharma, Nice Fit Ltd, and Jefferson's. And each one has a different problem. None of these are necessarily illegal acts, but they're just acts by the businesses which might result in negative public opinion. So our job as a employee of PR Vision is to write the best story possible. So you are going to hopefully do a good job of that, and you have instructions in order to do so. So this week we're taking the sides of the company, and we are writing to defend one of these. You pick one, and then we have our way of organizing. It says, do one paragraph introducing the company and saying something positive about it. This would be a good chance to remind people of the success the company has had, not only monetarily, but also with the community, how long they've been around, how long they've been a part of the community, what they're recognized for, awards, achievements. Then acknowledge the problem. It doesn't. So here it kind of forces us to say, yes, there is a problem, but it doesn't mean that you have to acknowledge full responsibility of the problem. You can shift some blame onto others in this PR attempt to save the company. Finally, outline what they propose to do about the dilemma, even if it's not so much their fault, what you can do about it. And finally, finish on a positive note, giving details of a future project, basically taking advantage of the limelight to make a good situation out of a bad one. So you should have a paragraph for each one of these, and they should be fairly detailed. And as far as the details, it's mostly up to you to come up with the details to these stories, so it's kind of a chance for creative writing. So hopefully you'll have some fun with that. This is the task drill assignment for this week. We will be having new material posted on Monday, and a follow-up video, new material posted next Thursday, and a follow-up video as well next weekend. In the meantime, stay healthy, stay isolated, stay diligent, and hopefully in the coming weeks, as the situation progresses, we'll get a little bit more information on what exactly we'll be doing with colloquiums. In the meantime, task journals are priority number 1, so do this one, and there'll be another one coming your way soon. Good luck.